Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Major Author Podcast, a podcast that celebrates and spotlights African authors on the continent through collaborative discussions and author interviews. I'm your host, Rachel Chiza.
I'm hosting Loic Ekinga, for a Congolese writer, and we'll be talking about his poetry chapbook, How to Wake a Butterfly, get to know him as a writer, and also get to know his creative process.
Your poem, A Quick Lesson in Silence, and others in the book reveal your relationship with your father. What is it like now? What was it like back then? And do you also feel that you understand him better now that you're older?
My trajectory is taking me to a place where I feel like I need to be more open, not be too afraid to look deep inside myself and unearth these things that need to be felt and said in order for me to step onto the emotional level, emotional catharsis I'm looking for in this difficult life we're living. And he's still very much the same. I hadn't met him. I hadn't seen him rather for a very long time when we left DRC as children. Until the time I came back and we met again last year and this year. Um, there was a 15, 16 year gap, and he's very much still the same. And so in my writing, um, my dad was this character that I used as a mirror, um, that I used as a painting rather, to portray um, the type of person I am, or the type of person I should be or should have been because of what I've taken from him. Because we're very similar. I mean, we cut from the same cloth because he's my dad. But now I think my dad is evolved into more of a metaphor of the things that I'm trying to change about myself, or what it represents right now is the things that I'm trying to do differently. Um, so our relationship is saying there's no animosity or anything like that, but there is a void. Um, there's a holiness there that's been like that for the rest of my life, for most of my life, and I hope not for the rest of my life. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does answer the question. And I think it's a brilliant way of crafting, using it as a metaphor for the different things. Let's talk a bit about silence. And I know that for men in our societies, it's like a given. You ought to know to speak up about certain things, whereas women, we may be more prone to speaking up and expressing how we feel. What's your take on it now, with your father and the relationship that he had with your mother and the moving away and the separation? Do you think that's why your father is silent, or is that just who he is? But also, what's your take on silence now?
Thank you for your question. It's a very difficult question to answer. I think it's very layered. Um, my dad is the way that he is because of, obviously, I think we are all results of our life experiences from our early childhood to where we are right now. And I feel like a lot of that, uh, which is very true for myself and everybody else, I believe, is also true for him. Um, and so silence, you know, um, among men, amongst fathers and sons and friends, and is I don't know whether it's being used, or at least for my father, it's being used to safeguard us from certain realities. Or I always feel like my dad, it's about being, having control of emotions that have a potential of overflowing and spilling out. And like I say in the poem, it's better than flinging sounds in the room. It's better than just letting everything out, because we don't know the consequences of. No, we do know the consequences, because what we've been told and what we've been taught is that we cannot allow ourselves to be that expressive with our emotions as men. And so emotional expression of that magnitude is has always been ingrained in our minds as being detrimental to our own well-being. So, and I think that comes from there. And this is just me speculating, because these are conversations that still need to be had. But I think and I feel, if I really feel like we have so much in common, this could be the main reason for it. Silence among men is a need for control, out of a fear of falling apart and letting everything out and not know what happens after you let all this pressure, this build up inside of you, just spill out.
All right, thank you for that. And reading your How to Wake a Butterfly, it comes off like a walk down memory lane or emotional lane. And I'm very keen to know, what was the creative process like, since you wrote it in the heart of COVID-19? How was it dealing with the pandemic and the emotional trauma, where you chose not to be silent?
The first, I think it's important to acknowledge that the pandemic, especially uh, at its height, was very detrimental to everybody, if not most people's mental and emotional well-being. And at the time when I wrote the book, I was just recovering from a terrible separation, at the time, and it just happened to be during the COVID lockdown in South Africa. At the time, it was level 5 lockdown, which was the most severe form of it. People weren't encouraged to go outside. People were forced indoors by police patrols, and I think the army was deployed. And so I had to find a place to rent, and I rented this room, and I stayed there for many months in isolation, more than anything, dealing with the pain and the ache I was experiencing at the time. It was a very terrible time, because you more than relief, you crave human contact, and COVID tells you human contact is fatal to you right now. It's deadly, and so now I needed to find an outlet, per se. And I think what happened was I needed to understand why I got to the position or to the place I was in terms of my hurt. And the best way I thought was for me to look back, um, and start retracing my life, so I can understand. Because this book is really about a conversation that I'm having with myself. If you as you read the book, there are certain poems I refer to the boy, and I refer to boy, which is of course me, but it's like I'm speaking to a version of myself that I've always wanted to have a conversation with, and I felt it was important for me to talk to me, to understand where I am right now and why does it hurt so much, and how do I then move past this? Because I couldn't, like I said, because of the pandemic, I couldn't really rely on modes of escapism that would have me talk to people or go out with friends or whatever people do now to get over hurt and pain. And so I was really forced to sit with it. And as a result, I started writing, starting from the beginning and to the point where I was then hopefully, hoping rather to heal and to move on.
I wonder, why was it important for you to use poetry to go down memory lane, but also to use it as a mirror for what you're feeling at that point in time, and then giving birth to How to Wake a Butterfly?
Um, I've always considered poetry. Um, I consider language to be a form of magic, because of what language can do, because of the creative ability that language is, the destructive ability that language is, and ultimately its transformative values. And in that magic, and I've said this before, poetry, it's its most potent spell. Um, Poetry is, in my opinion, the best way of using language to get the result that you want, whether it's healing, whether it's to get a rise out of someone, whether to incite romantic feelings. Poetry is the go-to. it's very ubiquitous as well, because we as people try to find our poetry in the music, the movies we watch, the books we read. We talk about poetry in motion, so you get the picture. And so I started writing poetry when I was 15, because at the time I admired my French teacher so much. And whatever form of literature he introduced us to each year, I would try out myself, because I always wanted to impress him, because I really wanted to just absorb and soak in whatever he did teach us. And that year it was poetry, and we were introduced to classic French poetry: Charles Baudelaire, Arthur Rimbaud, Alphonse de Lamartine, and all these writers. And I was fascinated by how and those people wrote, of course, within measures and form. And I was fascinated at how they could take those emotions and package them in such restricted structures of writing. And so I tried my hand at it. I went home and I decided to try my hand at it. And I wrote a very cheesy love poem, and it just stuck with me. And I started writing that. And from that time on, I've always used poetry to express myself. But I think without Work a Butterfly, I'd reached a different height of self-expression. With that's the first book where I really, or the first body of work where I started really looking inward and trying to unroot certain things and putting that on paper and be the most vulnerable version of myself I can be. So poetry is, for me, has always been the best medium to express feelings. Um, so yeah.
I found that when I also write, even if it's in my journal or really writing things out, I feel better. It's very therapeutic. Writing for me is therapeutic. So I understand that for you, poetry is your medium of therapy, so to speak. And so we'll have you read for us Mutilate, another poem that I really love.
Thank you. I think it's important that I give a bit of context. The last line of this poem is from it's taken from Khaled Hosseini's novel, And the Mountains Echo. Um, there in the first chapter, the little girl asks dad to tell her a story, and it tells the story of this giant who every year would come into the village and just pick a child out of a family and take the child to his mountain. And one time he went and he got a child from this one family, and the dad was so stricken by grief that he decided to follow the giant in this mountain, just to find that the child is actually living his best life. So the giant take the children, take them to school, and give them the best life. But that's not the point of the poem. The point of the poem is the last line of the poem, and just I think that line rather really encapsulate the emotion of this poem and what the poem was trying to do, or what my mom was trying to do in this poem. So it was important for me to mention that. So this is Mutilate. The year is 2001. My mother looks down at me and tells me that she's going away to study. She's taking my baby brother with her. I should have asked her why was home not good enough a classroom, but I didn't. And I let her walk because she promised to explain everything one day soon. Later that evening, and many evenings after that, I watched my father attempt to climb Mount Sinai, hoping to catch a glimpse of God's back. My dad filled every room in the house with the silence he exhaled, the silence my brother and I inhaled, the same silence that spread like a virus under our skin. We grew into hollow men, my brother and I. 20 years later, we're having this conversation again. This time she's in Chicago, not here still. I sit on a dirty blue rug of the room I'm renting, and she's worried about my sanity while I'm trying to hold a hand through the phone. You found so much comfort away from home, on the road. I don't understand why. And in a way only she masters, my mother spoke to the 10-year-old me like rain speaks to dust and quietens dirt. I found no comfort, son. I left for you, because sometimes to save the hand, you cut off a finger. Thank you very much.
I think one of my favorite lines from the poem is, my mother spoke to the 10-year-old me like rain speaks to dust and quietens that. I marked it in my book and I just sat with that line. I was just like, wow. And thank you for the highlight before you said it, the poem about, I think it's the last line, which you meant was from Khaled Hussein's book, the one, I found no comfort, son. I lived for you because sometimes to save the hand, you cut off a finger. Is that the line?
Yeah, the line is to save the hands. Save the hands. Sometimes you cut off a finger. That was a takeaway of the father was telling the daughter in the book, and so I remembered that statement, and I wrote the poem around that statement. That sometimes a little sacrifice is meant to save the bigger picture.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about your mother. I know the poem talks a bit about why she left, but could you give us a brief why she left? How did that affect you? And where are you now?
Well, my parents divorced when I was 10 or 11. I'm never really sure about the age, but it's between 10 and 11. And they had their problems like every couple, I suppose. And my mom felt it was important for her to move out, to divorce my dad, so she could, take flight. In other words, for her to expand herself and to self actualize. And as a result, she believed that would also then benefit us as her children. And so that's what she did. And she left, and honestly, don't blame her for it. I understand now. I think there is a poem that I wrote, 11th, I think it's titled 10th poem or 11th poem, that appears on Yeah Magazine's 19th edition, where I actually talk about this more in depth, where I basically tell my mother that I understand the decision she had to make, because when you become an adult and you are in a certain situation, there's sometimes need for one to make trusted and take that trusted decisions for them to get out of that situation. So that's what she did. And yeah, right now my mom and I, we're okay. I think we two adults who are just trying to find happiness. And I think that's what it is. When you start looking at your parents from an adult eye, not as from a child's eye, you just realize that all looking for the same thing. Um, and they have been looking for that same thing for longer than we have. Maybe you know, maybe also we were, but we were kids, so we didn't quite understand what is it that we're looking for. But when you become an adult and you start seeing your parents struggle, uh, in their quest for happiness and peace and fulfillment, it changes the dynamics a little bit. I'm still very much a son, but I'm still very much an adult as well. So our relationship is woven in between the fabric of that reality. Yeah, really, I hope this answers you. I'm just rambling at this point.
Yes, it does answer me. And I like what you said about looking at your mom's relationship now, or trying to understand her from with an adult perspective. I think I've had to do the same for my mother, understanding why she does the things that she does and why she did the things that she did. Being an adult now, I think I get to see things from that perspective and understand and be kind to her, but also be kind to myself, knowing that everything will be all right. If not now, tomorrow, yeah, things will fall into place. So I think that's very important for us to look at our parents from that perspective and understand them and know that they were trying. I think they were making the best of what they had, or with what they had. But also, one of the things I really, really loved about How to Wake a Butterfly is the continuous theme that runs through, I think, each poem, where you're very vulnerable. With some of the poems, I could feel the emotions were very ripe. And so I would read a poem and just sit with it and read it again and again and again, because I could feel everything that you put into the poem. So I wanted to understand why that was important for you, but also with some of the poems, I realized that you are defying a lot of societal norms that tell men, what, boys, men don't cry. You shouldn't express your love in a certain way. And with some of my favorite poems in the book, the love, you express love, and it's so vivid. It's loud. It's so loud. You're not afraid to express how you feel. Um, about your lover, and then the love for flowers and wearing pink, because we know that pink is for girls, and then it's only girls who are, it's like a rule, only girls are supposed to love flowers, and only boys don't wear pink. At what cost has that come at, where you've chosen to speak up and be bold about the things that you love? Has that cost you anything when it comes to loving loud? What has that been like for you? And also learning to cry and express your emotions loudly and not silently.
I was reading recently, before I start, I was reading KB Brookins' How to Identify Yourself with a Wound. And there's a line in one of the poems that says something like, let me tell you the story of a tenderness the world refused to call beautiful, but it lives. And I think the fact that they say that, the world decided to call this tenderness, refused to call it beautiful. When I read that, I thought of a story. There was a time where I was in the taxi, and and there was a lady who had a little boy with her, and a little baby girl that she was carrying. And before the taxi moved, these hawkers, there's a guy selling sweets, I think, and the boy asked the mom, "Can I have one of those?" And the lady went off. She went off about him always wanting to eat. This is what he's good at, and she was making a scene. And the boy was oddly calm about the situation, out of fear or respect, but he was really calm about it, until I don't know, that reaction or lack thereof, made the mom angry, and she started poking him and pushing him around, and he started crying. And when he started crying, she started berating him for crying, and started calling him, sorry for the word, a sissy. Why are you crying in front of people? Be a man and all these things. I think about that story, and I think about how, had I been a child in a taxi, with that, I probably would with the mom. And then the little boy would have been like, dude, why are you crying in front of people? Don't be gay. And that normal human reaction to being emotionally and physically abused, is what we have taken as men, and, labeled as wrong, labeled as embarrassing, labeled as a subtracting factor of some sort. And so when I started writing How to Wake a Butterfly, and when I started doing a lot of digging, I started doing a lot of soul searching, and then I realized that a lot of my reactions to the things that I've experienced, that were, for instance, manifested as anger, were just me trying to channel the softness that I was told would be detrimental to me, and I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to be at a place where I could look at an emotion, a negative emotion, and process it in a way that would bring me catharsis without having to destroy what I already had, what was around me. So How to Work a Butterfly came around because I had to sit down and start these things. And I realized that deep down inside, I'm still very much that 10-year-old boy who was very much still a crier. But as time went by, realized that he couldn't and he wouldn't survive in this world by being his true self. And so I felt like it was important for me, and I feel it's still important for me to try and reclaim that authentic self, through my work, to try and peel off these layers that have taken me almost 30 years to create and to build up, which is, it's work that needs to be done. And I think I started doing that really when I wrote the book, and every work that I'm writing after that. At what cost has it come? It's difficult, like I said. It's a lot of work. It's undoing of decades of indoctrination. It's undoing of decades of, what you believe to be right. And in all of that, you realize that the things that come naturally to you, certain reactions that came naturally to you as a child, as a little boy, or as a teenager, that were frowned upon, were always a reality check to see that, okay, this is a part of me that I think is normal. I reacted in this way. I said what I said, or I wore what I wore, or I danced the way I danced because it came naturally. But the feedback I'm getting is that this is not something that I should be doing, and so you try to rectify that, and you go through life with, through episodes of rectifications until you get to a place where you feel like you could be one acceptable or deemed to be important, or someone you can listen to, or someone who's considered strong. And I didn't want that for myself anymore. I didn't want it for myself anymore because, like I said, I was in a place of so much hurt, and I felt like me having to deal with it logically like I would normally deal with such trauma was just not working. Because, like I said, at the time, because of the pandemic, I didn't have the expressive outlets emotional outlets rather, that I would normally have with people around. So I had to sit with this grief and trying to finally undo this noose around my neck. So it's really that, what the world, the tenderness that the world refused to call beautiful, is what's killing so many men on the inside, at least, and sometimes on the outside based on their actions. And we can see the effect of that in society as a whole. And yeah, in my work, I'm trying to ask those questions to myself and to the people reading my work. I have gotten a lot of feedback recently, of people. I was quite surprised that so many people also related to that, to those experiences, and trying to undo some of those things. And I think that's what I'm striving to do. I'm striving to tell my story, to tell my stories to myself first, in order for me to undo these things. And if the consequence is that more people will start questioning themselves and start looking at themselves in a different light, then I'm happy. I'm glad.
I love that tenderness that the world refused to call beautiful, because I think as a society we put pressure on men, and I love that your work is not, because I know usually when we create, first and foremost, I think it's for us, because you're just a channel, so you're letting out what is already inside of you, what you're examining, what you're working on, and then you find that when you share your work, then the people who read it also share similar experiences, so they get to see themselves in the work that you have created. And so I love that this is what you're doing, dealing with those situations that we normally wouldn't deal with, and situations that are allowing men to sit back and think on the layers that they've had, that they just need to let go of, and try to reclaim their authentic selves, and know that it's okay. It's okay to love loudly. It's okay to express your emotions, show that you're hurt, show that you're happy, show that you're in love. And so in that spirit, we're going to move into one of my favorite themes in the poem, in the poetry collection, that was talking about love, and a new love and a past love. And we'll have you read to us the poem Likasi.
This is a very short poem about a very tragic event. And it reads: There was a 10-year age gap between them, a long, long distance. The woman lies on her back, naked, expecting to feel. The little boy traces her body with his eyes, from between her thighs all the way to her smiling face. A long, long distance. Thank you.
Thank you. Just give us background of that poem, because I know there's a story behind it, and because in the collection there are more poems around Likasi. So give us a brief background of why it appeared there and what it means to you. What was that experience? Was it your experience? Was it someone else's experience?
This section of the book, the Likasi section of the book, Likasi is actually a small town in southeast DRC, where when my mom remarried, we moved to, and she and my stepdad went to South Africa for a holiday and was left at home with the maid. So the Likasi part of the book talks about child molestation. I think it's an episode of I think my early introduction to sex, which for some reason was as a teenager was never a problem. I think when I actually got into conversations with my partner about it, I think that's when I realized, okay, this was actually kind of messed up, because it reminds me of this. I was listening, like I told you earlier, I was listening to Harry Styles' album, and there's a song in there, Matilda, and Harry Styles is telling Matilda that he finds it strange that there's so many things that happened to her with her family, so many things that she thinks are normal were actually kind of messed up, and he doesn't understand how she goes through life smiling, um, not acknowledging the trauma of a childhood. And I think I was Matilda for the longest time until I had those conversations, and I decided to write about them in the book. And yeah, so Likasi is that first poem. It talks about, like I talk about the long distance between them, and the distance is metaphor for their age, the sexual experience, where they were in their lives at the moment, and how it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Um, yeah, so that's the context behind it. Um, yeah, a bit of context.
All right, thank you. Let's get into the new love. Please read to us, congregation, which I think it's good to be number one using poems that are my favorite from this chapbook. Congregation is number one on my list.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. This is a little story about Instagram. More than Instagram, it starts there. Um, so this um, I met a girl once. It was on Instagram. I was drawn to her words like a butterflies to pinks and yellows. So I left her my number. Smooth move that. I met a girl once, her skin as radiant as her words, and she spoke with the grace of a pearl necklace. I found out that she'd also lost a grandmother sooner than I did mine, but I imagined them in another life, getting acquainted before I met the girl. A grandson and your granddaughter would be perfect for each other. I imagine my grandmother would say, and I'd laugh quietly. She's a tiny woman from Central Africa, standing behind a kerosene lamp, and the girl's grandmother, a Nubian queen from the south, humming hymns, now pulling strings. What words do they have in common? What letters, if not the L's in our names? I met a girl on Instagram once. I'm drawn to her love like a hummingbird, to greens and lilacs, batting my wings 1,000 times over to stay in one place, to tell her, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, honey.
I feel like it got me in my feelings. Um, so let's talk about the old love and the new love. With reading Likasi, you talk about the period of molestation and you're trying to overcome that. Wondering, did you have to do therapy, or your writing has been that tool that you've used to overcome that? And then with getting into a new relationship, have you had to unburden, where you tell your partner that, you know what, I went through this and that?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Um, yes, How to Work a Butterfly was self therapeutic in so many ways. The book was Like I said, I was not aware of the trauma. I was aware of certain traumas, but I was more focused on the more immediate ones, and I was not. Then, as a result, I wasn't really into. I didn't really acknowledge the more insidious ones, and the ones that I could not really, um, you know, quickly or automatically locate. And so I felt like I wanted to undo, and I wanted to break the spell of these things that I feel have been holding me, even unbeknownst to myself, um, like the molestation episode, where I felt like giving it language would break its spell, you know. Um, and I think that's the beauty of language as well. It's the fact that emotions and things that that's why we don't talk about certain things, because giving language to them gives them power, and how we talk about them, I believe, determines where they stand on the power rankings, if I have to put it that way. And so I wrote the Likasi section of the book to give language to this trauma that until then I did not acknowledge as a big player in my existence, in my life, in my human experience. And so Likasi was there to do that. And talking about new love, I have I have always been, like I said, my first poem was a love poem. I've always been a fan, not more than a fan. I wanted to be a fan and an active participant in the act of love. Um, but I think as I grew old and I grew in my writing and in my art and as a human being, I've come to understand and to admit the importance and the impact of that love has in art, on not only my life but the human experience in general. Um, I feel like love, the elixir of our experiences. We get to mix it with ambition. We mix love with survival. But love is still very much um, the what connects us and what makes us who we are. Um, I think, like Paul says in the Bible, um, that three remain: faith, hope, and love. But love is the greatest of them all. And I feel like that's how important love is. That when everything fades away, that's what remains. Love remains. And I think love for me was very much the tool I used to liberate myself. Um, if you read the rest of the book, I think I that's what I implied with the rest of the book, is to how having experienced love in my new relationship at the time was, the liberating factor, because love allowed me to have conversations with myself. Love allowed me to create a space, or love created a space for me, safe enough for me to be able to have these difficult conversations and undo some of the things that I've been, let go of some of the things that I've been carrying. Um, so yeah, yeah, I think I hope I answered you this time again.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. And I love that you acknowledge that for you, you've always wanted to be an active participant in the act of love. And really, I find that writings about love just hit right, and I love reading things around that, books or even watching movies around that, because I believe it's a powerful, powerful tool. And I'm so glad that it was one of the things that you used to, or it came as a form of healing for you. It brought healing when you got into that zone where you feel that, okay, I feel loved, and it helped you dig deep and try to give language to the things that you couldn't give language before, but also bringing you healing. You make a lot of biblical references, and I wondered, how should we say, I don't want to even give it a label, but would you call yourself a religious person, or did you simply grow up in a religious household and now you're simply existing and trying to find your way with God?
I was asked this question last month, I think. I grew up Christian, like a lot of people, and being a child who was always interested, um, even without knowing, in language. I I really leaned into biblical scriptures and what they meant. If anybody who knows me knows that I'm a big fan of any of Paul's letters. I think he's the most amazing writer. He's the best writer in the Bible. And so I've always, for so long in my life, I've always, you know, gotten my wisdom from the Bible. And I was an active participant in my faith. I think right now where I think I'm at peace with where I am right now spiritually in my relationship with God. It's not the same as what it was, but I think my understanding of the religion and of God has changed. And I think because I allowed myself to do so, there's always, and which I don't blame anybody for it. If it works for them, there's always the fear of wanting to one question faith, question religion, and allowed oneself to experiment and to go through the journey. And what's interesting about questioning God is, if you have to go back to the Bible just a minute, some of the greatest writers in the Bible question God. David, for instance, in a lot of the Psalms, from David and the other writers of the Psalms, a lot of them question God. Jesus questioned God on the cross, and I think questioning God is a pathway to understanding Him better, to understanding Him more, and understanding how God, manifests Himself in your life. That's where I was going with this. So by questioning God, with your reality and your experiences and what you're seeing around the world, it God as a way of then you know molding Himself, if I dare say so, molding Himself um, in this way for you to keep that relationship with Him. And I think for me, it's been love, you know, and love has been my religion. Uh, I with love comes honesty, and with love comes acceptance, which are just byproducts of being like I said, an active participant in the act of it. And I think that's my way of worshiping, and that's my way of experiencing the divine in my life. And I put that in my work as well. In my new work, there's a lot of mentions of God. I was quite shocked as I was reading back some of my new work, and I was just like, man, there's a lot of God in here. Um, but it's because God is love, isn't it? And if I want to speak of love, I cannot speak of love, I feel, without speaking about God. And so these metaphors and these representations of God are really intertwined, and they're interwoven into the stories I want to tell and how I want to tell them. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. It has reminded me of a scripture that says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So clearly, your understanding of love is centered around what the Bible talks about love, which is really a beautiful thing because it's abounding in the work. Like when I read that How to Wake a Butterfly, right from I think poem to very many other poems in the book, there's lots of biblical reference. So I was really interested in hearing your perspective on what you think about that. And I love the fact that you read say like Paul's stories with that in mind. He's a great storyteller. The language is really, really beautiful. Let's talk a bit about your creative process, especially in regards to How to Wake a Butterfly. What was it like? Since you wrote it during COVID, did you have to work hours and hours on it, or did you, do sit down in 1 month and just create the body of work that we have now?
Thank you so much. How to Work a Butterfly didn't take that long to write. I'm not quite sure about the timeline, but at least it didn't feel like I took a very long time writing it. I I'd written something, another project before How to Work a Butterfly, that spoke a lot of my mental and emotional state at the time during COVID, but that one never got the chance to be. published into the world, and Book of Butterfly was the one that came right after it. I think I wrote Lesson in Silence for Poetry Africa slam competition, and the poem made it to the finals. And I decided to write a book about my childhood. And I think a lot of it was also by reading poets like Phil Kay, and how he recounts his family's history, and I felt like that's something I wanted to do, because I felt at the time what I needed to do, like I said, was to retrace my steps, emotionally and otherwise, in order for me to locate myself, and trying to deal with it and move forward. So How to Work a Butterfly took me, I think, 2 or 3 months to write. Um, yeah, it didn't take long. It took me 2 or 3 months to write, and in December, I think, of 2020, um, I got the publishing contract, and everything else came after. So my creative process, I don't think I have a regimen. I don't have a certain way of writing. Or I write when I can. I write when I have the urge for it. Um, Sometimes I will have a sentence in my head, and I'll just open my notes and just write it down and let it breathe and let it be, and return to it when I'm trying to write another poem. Because sometimes I'm sitting down to write a completely different poem, and I look at this line and I'm like, how do I then incorporate this line and this idea into this new poem I'm writing? So the poems decide, and this is a very poet answer to give, but the poems decide when they want to be written, how they want to be written, and ultimately when they want to be written. So I'm just a vessel, honestly.
I was recently in a workshop by Nick Makoha, a poet from the UK. He was asking us about our creative processes, and many of us say that, we write when there's an urge to write. And he said, you can't call yourself a professional if you write when you want to write. So it's like wanting to walk, and then one of your legs says, I will walk when I want to walk, yet you want to do it. And that got me wondering, are you only a professional writer, or if you're aspiring to get to the level some of the poets and the different authors have gotten to, do you have what I would call, in quotes, a professional writing process, where you know that every day, say at maybe 3 p.m., I sit down and write something. I don't care how I'm feeling. I don't care what's around me. I'm going to sit down and, write something. I don't know what you think about that, Loic.
That's interesting. Not so long ago, I was on the phone with a writer friend of mine, and he mentioned something like that as well. And I do understand that. I do understand the appeal of that and the importance of having a writing schedule, because his argument was that, it's like work. If you spend 8 hours doing your day job, why don't you want to, take a few hours to do writing? Which is, of course, I think it's a nice way of looking at it, but at the same time, I think our understanding, at least for me, my understanding of writing is not only sitting down and writing. I think I tweeted about this not so long ago, and I was so glad to see that so many people related to this. Even reading is writing, you know. Um, Even you not reading, even you going on YouTube and watching someone else read poems is also writing. You are still taking time to work towards your craft, um, so you I don't think one has to, tell themselves, oh, I haven't written today, and sit down and start to grind words out of their minds, and grind out experiences, and the likes. And the same friend also told me something that stayed with me. He told me that the writing is in the living. Writing comes with living, and so writing comes with, is very much attached to experiences and the human experience. And at the time, if you don't feel like you have experienced anything significant, or you cannot remember specific experience that you want to put on paper, it becomes a bit crippling. It loses that thing. So I my understanding is, when I can't write, let me at least read. Let me at least have conversations about writing, talk to other poets, attend workshops. Even if it's just you there being a spectator, attend workshops and learn more about your writing. And I think that also plays into writing, because when you actually sit down to write, you find that you start writing a large volume of work, because you've accumulated and have amassed so much knowledge, and um, in that period where you were not writing. So that's my process, if that's a process. Because when I'm not writing, I am, and I'm not watching a movie or playing a game, I'm probably reading collection or watching an interview or a lecture, uh, by a poet. So
I totally agree with you. And like your friend rightly said, writing is in living, because I too do the same. I watch lots of author interviews. I will read books, listen on, attend workshops, and simply immerse myself in the whole experience of writing, because it's not just me sitting down and, scribbling things down, but also in hearing what other people have to say, engaging with fellow writers and just learning from them. So it's all part of the process. It all builds up to you doing things right.
Thank you everyone for tuning in, and to Loic, thank you for your time. Remember to follow Loic on Twitter at FastLoic, to further engage with him and his work. And also don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. This episode was powered by Gote Zentrum Kampala.